You are standing at a threshold right now, not metaphorically, not as a poetic device to ease you into something comfortable. Actually, literally, the ground beneath the version of you that existed yesterday is dissolving, and the ground on the other side of where you're standing hasn't fully materialized yet. You are in the in-between. You are in the passage. And the fact that something inside you found this transmission, the fact that something in you said yes to these words before you even knew what they were going to say, that is how you know the gate is open. There is a crystalline timeline that exists beyond the frequency range of what most humans have been able to access. It has always existed. It is not new. It is not something being created in response to what's happening in the world. It was there before you were born into this version of yourself. And it will be there long after every version of you that could have hesitated at this gate has dissolved. It is the frequency architecture of a reality that operates at a fundamentally different density than the one you've been living in. And it is calling you. It has been calling you for longer than you consciously know. The 3D world, the world of solid objects and fixed identities and linear time and cause and effect logic that moves in only one direction. That world is not being destroyed. It is not ending in the catastrophic sense. It is simply becoming too small for what you are becoming. It is like a shell that a living creature grows out of. The shell doesn't shatter violently. The creature simply expands until the shell can no longer contain it. And then the creature moves on, and the shell remains behind, and the creature never goes back inside it because it cannot. Because it has grown. Because what it is now is larger than what the shell was built to hold. You are the creature. The 3D world is the shell, and you have been growing inside it for longer than you realize. This transmission is a gate. It is a crossing point. What you understand when you finish moving through it will be different from what you understood when you arrived here. Not because information was added to you like water poured into a container, but because understanding at this level is not additive, it is transformative. It changes the structure of the container itself. It changes what you are capable of holding. And once that change happens, once the structure shifts, you cannot pour yourself back into the old shape. The old shape no longer fits. So let's begin at the beginning. Let's begin at the gate. There is something you've been experiencing that you may not have had words for. A kind of pressure that isn't quite physical, but isn't quite mental either. A sense of things accelerating around you, while simultaneously something in you is becoming very still. A feeling that the life you've been living, the one that made sense by the rules you were given, is somehow no longer fully real, like you're watching it from a slight distance. Like the colors are the same, but the substance has changed. like you keep reaching for the familiar and finding that your hand passes through it. Some of you have been experiencing this as loss, as grief for something you can't name, as a kind of mourning that has no clear object. You don't know what you're mourning. You just know that something is ending. And the grief is real. The grief is valid. But what you are mourning is not a tragedy. What you are mourning is the 3D self. The version of you that was built for a density you are leaving. That self served you. That self carried you to this exact threshold. And now it is releasing you, and you are releasing it. And the release feels like loss, because in a very real sense, it is loss. You are losing a version of yourself. You are losing a world that organized itself around that version of you. And the new world, the crystalline world, hasn't fully materialized yet in your sensory experience. So you stand between them, in the passage, at the gate. This is not a malfunction. This is the process. This is exactly what a state transition feels like from the inside. Let me tell you about state transitions. Let me tell you about what physics actually discovered about how reality changes, because this is not metaphor. This is the mechanism. This is the literal architecture of how one state of being becomes another. In quantum mechanics, a system can exist in what is called superposition. This means it exists in multiple possible states simultaneously, not sequentially, not first one state, then another, but genuinely, actually, at the same time, in all possible states at once. The particle is here and there. The electron is spinning up and spinning down. The system is in state A and state B and state C all at once, each with a certain probability, each fully real in its own quantum sense. And then something happens. An observation occurs. A measurement is made. A threshold is crossed. And the superposition collapses. All of those simultaneous possibilities resolve into one. The particle is here. The electron is spinning up. The system is in state A. The collapse is instantaneous. It does not happen gradually. It does not transition smoothly from many to one. It snaps. It shifts. It crosses a threshold and arrives on the other side. And on the other side there is only one state. And that one state is absolutely, completely, irreversibly real. This is what is happening to you. You have been in superposition. You have been existing simultaneously in the version of yourself that belongs to the 3D timeline, and the version of yourself that belongs to the crystalline timeline. Both have been real. Both have been you. You have felt the pull of both. The familiar gravity of the dense world you know, and the strange luminous pull of something you can feel but not quite see. You have been in both places at once, and it has been exhausting, because superposition is not a stable state for a consciousness that is ready to cross. It is a threshold state, It is the state you're in right before the collapse. And the collapse is coming. For some of you, it has already begun. For some of you, this transmission is part of the collapse itself, the observation that causes the superposition to resolve, the measurement that tips the system from many to one. The crystalline timeline is the one state that your superposition is collapsing into. If you can feel yourself standing in that superposition right now, between the frequency you've been performing and the one you're actually built to inhabit, there is a complete guide written for exactly this passage. The sealed timeline maps the full crossing in 5 precise phases, from diagnosing the patterns that have been draining your field all the way through to sealed coherence, where incoherent frequencies mechanically cannot reach you. It's waiting for you in the description below. Now let's talk about what that actually means. Because the word crystalline is not decorative, it is precise. It is describing a specific quality of reality that is different from the quality of reality you've been living in. In physics, a crystal is a substance whose atoms are arranged in a perfectly ordered, repeating pattern. The structure is not random. It is not approximate. It is exact. Every atom is in precisely the relationship it needs to be in with every other atom. And because of this perfect structural order, crystals have properties that disordered materials don't have. They transmit light in specific, predictable ways. They resonate at specific frequencies. They are coherent, meaning all of their internal structure vibrates in alignment, in phase, together. A crystal doesn't have some parts going one direction and other parts going another. It moves as one. The crystalline timeline is a reality that operates with this kind of coherence, where the 3D world is characterized by fragmentation, separate objects, separate selves, linear time that moves in only one direction, cause and effect that operates mechanically, a universe that is fundamentally indifferent to the consciousness experiencing it. The crystalline timeline is characterized by coherence, by alignment, by a kind of structural order that makes things like synchronicity not mysterious anomalies, but the expected norm. Where the 3D world experiences coincidence as surprising, the crystalline timeline experiences alignment as the baseline. Where the 3D world experiences consciousness as a byproduct of matter, the crystalline timeline experiences matter as a byproduct of consciousness. This is not a small difference. This is not a slight upgrade. This is a phase transition. This is what physicists call a change in the order parameter of a system. The fundamental organizational principle shifts, and when it does, the properties of everything in the system change simultaneously. Not gradually, all at once. Think about water becoming ice. Water is liquid. Its molecules are moving, disordered, each one doing its own thing within the general flow. Then the temperature drops to a threshold point, and at that threshold, the water doesn't gradually become more ice-like. It crosses a phase transition. The molecules reorganize. The disorder becomes order. The liquid becomes solid. The properties change completely and instantaneously at the threshold. And once the water is ice, you cannot have some of it be liquid and some of it be ice at the same temperature. The whole system is in the new state. You are at the temperature threshold right now. The question is not whether the phase transition will happen. The question is whether you are going to resist it or allow it, whether you are going to try to hold the liquid form or let yourself crystallize. If this transmission is landing in your body as true, if you feel the gate, consider subscribing and leaving a like, so more people standing at this same threshold can find their way here. Let me tell you what the 3D world actually is. Not as a judgment, not as something to be condemned or escaped, but as a precise description of a frequency range, a density level, a specific configuration of consciousness and matter that served an evolutionary purpose and is now, for you, reaching its completion. The third dimension is characterized by separation, by the experience of being a discrete self, bounded by a physical body, moving through a physical world made of objects that are separate from each other and from you. Time in 3D is linear. It moves from past through present to future in one direction only, and you can only inhabit one moment at a time. Causality in 3D is mechanical. Things happen because other things caused them, and the cause is always prior to the effect, and the chain of causation is always external to you. In 3D, consciousness is something that happens inside you and has no direct effect on the external world. You can think about a thing, but your thinking doesn't change the thing. The thing is out there, separate from you, governed by physical laws that operate independently of your awareness of them. You are an observer of a reality that exists apart from you. You are a passenger in a universe that was here before you and will be here after you, and doesn't particularly register your presence. This is not a description of a bad world. This is a description of a training ground, a place where consciousness learns certain things. Things like individual agency, like the experience of consequence, like the development of a self that knows itself as separate before it can know itself as unified. The 3D world is a school, and like all schools, it is designed to be completed. It is designed to teach you what it teaches you and then graduate you. You are graduating. The crystalline timeline is what exists on the other side of graduation, and it operates by different rules. Not better rules in a moral sense, different rules in a structural sense. The way university operates by different rules than kindergarten. Not because kindergarten was wrong, but because you have grown past what kindergarten was designed to teach. In the crystalline timeline, the separation that defines 3D begins to dissolve. Not all at once, not into a formless unity where you lose yourself entirely, but into a coherence where the boundaries between self and world become permeable in a specific way. You begin to experience yourself as a node in a field, rather than as an isolated object in a void. Your consciousness begins to register its own participation in the reality it's observing, the observer effect, which in quantum mechanics describes how the act of measurement changes what is being measured, becomes experientially real. You notice that what you hold in your awareness shapes what manifests in your experience, not as a belief, as a direct observation. Time in the crystalline timeline is not linear in the same way. This doesn't mean time stops existing. It means you begin to access what physicists call the block universe. The understanding that past, present, and future are not sequential states, but simultaneous ones. That time is a dimension rather than a river. That what you call the future is not something that hasn't happened yet, but something that is happening at a frequency you haven't been attuned to. In the crystalline timeline, you begin to sense the future the way you currently sense the present. Not perfectly, not completely, but in flashes, in knowing, in the strange certainty that arrives before the evidence. Causality in the crystalline timeline is not mechanical. It is resonant. Things don't happen to you because prior external events caused them. Things arrive in your reality because your frequency called them. This is not magical thinking. This is the physics of coherent systems. In a coherent system, elements that vibrate at the same frequency naturally come into resonance with each other. They find each other across apparent distance. They organize themselves into relationship without any mechanical chain of causation connecting them. The crystalline timeline is a coherent system. And in a coherent system, you don't create your reality by doing. You create it by being. This is the gate. This is what's on the other side. And you are standing at the threshold of it right now. But let's talk about why now. Because the question you may be carrying is not whether this is real. Something in you already knows it's real, which is why you're still here, still listening, still at this gate. The question you may be carrying is why now? Why is this happening now? Why is this threshold appearing in your life at this particular moment? There are two answers to this question. The first is personal. The second is collective. And they are both true simultaneously. The personal answer is this: you have done the work, not the work of striving necessarily, not the work of grinding toward a goal, but the work of living, of experiencing, of being broken open by the things that break you open, and finding something on the other side of the breaking that is more real than what was there before. You have accumulated through the living of your life, a frequency that is now resonant with what's on the other side of this gate. The gate doesn't open on a schedule. It doesn't open because you deserve it or because you've earned it in the transactional sense. It opens when your frequency matches the frequency on the other side, and your frequency matches. Right now. That's why the gate is open. That's why you're here. The collective answer is this. The planet itself is undergoing a phase transition. This is not metaphor. The Earth has a measurable electromagnetic field, the Schumann resonance, and that field has been shifting. The baseline frequency of the planet's electromagnetic environment has been changing, and consciousness is not separate from that environment. You are not a consciousness that exists inside a neutral physical container. You are a consciousness that is continuously in relationship with the electromagnetic field of the planet you inhabit. When the planet's frequency shifts, the frequency range available to human consciousness shifts with it. What was previously accessible only to those who had spent decades in disciplined practice is becoming accessible to people who have done nothing more than live with enough openness to receive it. The crystalline timeline is not a destination that a few special individuals reach. It is a frequency range that is becoming available to a critical mass of human consciousness. And you, the one listening to this right now, the one who found this transmission, you are part of that critical mass. You are one of the ones whose frequency is at the leading edge of this collective phase transition. This is what people mean when they talk about being a chosen one, not chosen in the sense of selected by an external authority, chosen in the sense of having chosen at the level of your deepest nature to be at this edge, to be one of the first through the gate, to be one of the ones who crosses, and then, by crossing, makes the crossing easier for those who come after. The chosen one is not a designation of specialness in the hierarchical sense. It is a description of a frequency signature. It is a description of a soul that said yes to this crossing before it was born into this body. You chose to be here at this threshold. You chose to be one of the ones standing at this gate at this moment in history. And the choosing is not something you did consciously in this lifetime. It is something you did at a level of yourself that is deeper than the conscious self you currently identify with. But you can feel it, can't you? You can feel the truth of it. Not as a flattering story about how special you are, but as a weight, as a responsibility, as the feeling that something is required of you that you don't fully understand yet, but can't pretend you don't feel. That is the chosen one frequency. That is the signature of a consciousness that agreed to be at this gate. And the gate is open. I want to pause here and ask you something directly. Has there been a moment in your life when you knew, without question, that you had crossed a point of no return? When something shifted all at once and the person you were before that moment could not come back. Not a gradual change. A crossing. Leave it in the comments. Name the threshold you stepped through. Now, let me tell you about the mechanics of the shift itself. Because understanding what is actually happening in your consciousness and your body as you cross this threshold is important. Not because the understanding makes it happen. The crossing doesn't require intellectual understanding. But because the understanding can relieve the fear that makes you hesitate at the gate. And hesitation at the gate is the only thing that can delay the crossing. When a system undergoes a phase transition, when water becomes ice, when a metal becomes a superconductor, when a disordered system becomes an ordered crystal, there is a period just before the transition that physicists call critical fluctuations. The system becomes unstable. It oscillates wildly between the old state and the new state. It seems chaotic, disorganized, even broken. The water, just before it freezes, develops strange currents and eddies that don't exist in normal liquid water. The metal, just before it becomes superconducting, develops strange resistance fluctuations. The system looks like it's falling apart, but it's not falling apart. It is reorganizing. It is at the threshold of a new order. And the apparent chaos is the process of the old order releasing and the new order assembling. What you have been experiencing, the disorientation, the sense of nothing quite making sense, the feeling that you're between two worlds, the strange grief and the strange excitement that seem to coexist without resolution. That is critical fluctuations. That is the phase transition in progress. That is not a sign that something is wrong. That is the exact signature of a consciousness at the threshold of a phase change. Your nervous system is reorganizing. Your neural architecture is literally rewiring, not metaphorically, but physically. The brain is a plastic organ. It rewires in response to the frequencies it's exposed to and the patterns of awareness it practices. As your frequency shifts toward the crystalline timeline, your brain is building new neural pathways to support the new modes of perception that frequency range makes available. And the building of new pathways means the old pathways are being used less. And when old pathways are used less, the experiences that depended on those pathways feel less real, less solid, less certain. This is why the 3D world feels slightly unreal right now. Not because it's disappearing, it's still there, but because the neural architecture that made it feel maximally real is being supplemented by new architecture that makes other things, things that used to be peripheral or invisible, feel increasingly real. You are growing new eyes. That is what this is. You are growing the perceptual apparatus for a different frequency range. And while you're growing it, you're in the awkward stage where the old eyes are still dominant, but the new ones are coming online. and the world looks strange because you're seeing it through two different optical systems simultaneously. This is temporary, not in the dismissive sense, not in the sense of just get through it and it'll be fine. In the precise sense, the superposition state is temporary. The critical fluctuation period is temporary. The threshold is a crossing point, not a dwelling place. You are not meant to live at the gate. You are meant to cross it, and the crossing happens through a specific mechanism. It happens through frequency matching. Through choosing, in each moment, to attune to the crystalline frequency rather than the 3D frequency. Through practicing the orientation of consciousness that corresponds to where you're going rather than where you've been. Through learning to feel the difference between the two frequencies in your own body and consciously choosing the higher one again and again until the choice becomes the default, until the new frequency becomes your baseline, until the crystalline timeline is not something you're reaching for, but something you're standing in. Let me give you the felt sense of the difference. Because this is not abstract, you can feel this right now in your body, in this moment. The 3D frequency feels like contraction, like smallness, like the world pressing in on you from all sides and you having to push back against it to maintain your space. It feels like effort, like resistance, like the constant expenditure of energy to hold yourself together against a world that is indifferent or hostile. It feels like time is running out, like there is never enough time, never enough resources, never enough love, never enough safety. It feels like you are separate, and that separation is dangerous, and you have to protect the boundary between you and everything else, or you will be lost. The crystalline frequency feels like expansion, like spaciousness, like you are larger than your body, larger than your circumstances, larger than the story you've been telling about who you are and what is possible for you. It feels like time is not running out, but opening up, like there is more of it than you need, like the present moment is vast and you can rest in it. It feels like the world is not indifferent but responsive, like it is in relationship with you, like it is listening to you, like it is organized around your awareness in a way that makes things arrive at the right time in the right form. It feels like connection rather than separation, not the loss of self into merger, but the expansion of self into a larger field where you are still distinctly you, but you are you in relationship with everything rather than you in opposition to everything. You have felt this. You have had moments of this. The moments where everything suddenly felt right, where you felt held by life rather than threatened by it, where a sense of knowing arrived that was larger than your thinking mind could account for. Those moments were not accidents. They were not flukes. They were glimpses through the gate. They were moments when your frequency briefly matched the crystalline timeline, and you felt what it feels like to be there. The shift is the process of making those glimpses permanent, of making the crystalline frequency your home frequency rather than your vacation frequency, of crossing through the gate and staying on the other side instead of visiting and coming back. Now, I want to tell you about a man named Elias. Elias was not a remarkable man by the standards of the world he lived in. He was not famous. He was not wealthy. He had not accomplished the things that the 3D world uses to measure a life's worth. What he had done was live, with full attention, with a willingness to feel everything, with a stubbornness about truth that had cost him most of the comfortable lies that other people use to make the 3D world bearable. By the time Elias was in his late 30s, he had lost most of what he'd built. A career that had seemed meaningful had revealed itself as hollow. A relationship he'd poured everything into had ended in a way that left him not just alone, but uncertain about his own judgment. A sense of purpose that had organized his days had quietly dissolved, leaving him with a life that looked functional from the outside and felt completely empty from the inside. He was not in crisis in the dramatic sense. He went to work. He paid his bills. He called his family on the appropriate occasions. But inside, in the place where his sense of reality lived, something had gone very quiet. And in that quiet, he began to notice things he had never noticed before. He noticed that when he was around certain people, his body felt lighter. And when he was around other people, his body felt heavy in a way that had nothing to do with the conversation or the circumstances. He noticed that certain thoughts, the ones that belonged to the story of who he'd been, felt like they were being thought in a voice that wasn't quite his, like he was reciting lines from a script he hadn't written. He noticed that in the moments between thoughts, in the gaps, there was something, a quality of awareness, a spaciousness that felt more real than the thoughts themselves. He didn't have language for any of this. He didn't have a framework. He just noticed. And the noticing itself began to change him. One morning, Elias woke before dawn, not because he'd planned to, not because an alarm had gone off, but because something had pulled him out of sleep with a clarity that felt like a hand on his shoulder. He lay in the dark, and he felt, for the first time in years, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not in the sense that his life was going well. It wasn't by any external measure. But in the sense that this moment, this exact configuration of his life, was not a mistake, was not a failure, was the precise set of conditions required to bring him to a threshold. He didn't know what threshold. He didn't have the word for it. But he felt the gate. He felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not seeing it yet, but knowing it's coming, knowing the atmosphere has already shifted, even though the sky still looks the same. In the weeks that followed, Elias began to make choices that made no sense to the people around him. He left the job, not for the job, just left it, with nothing lined up, with savings that would last 6 months if he was careful. He stopped spending time with people who made his body feel heavy, even the ones he'd known for years, even the ones he felt obligated to. He started spending hours in silence, not meditating in any formal sense, just sitting with the spaciousness he'd found in the gaps between thoughts, letting it expand. His friends were worried. His family was confused. The 3D world looked at what Elias was doing and saw a man falling apart. And from within the 3D framework, they were right. By 3D metrics, Elias was dismantling his life. But Elias was not dismantling his life. Elias was crossing a threshold. What looked like loss from the outside was release from the inside. What looked like failure was the shedding of a shell. What looked like a man coming undone was a consciousness in the process of a phase transition, in the critical fluctuation period, oscillating between the old order and the new, apparently chaotic, but actually reorganizing into something more coherent than anything that had come before. 6 months later, Elias was not wealthy. He was not famous. He had not built a new version of the life he'd dismantled. But he was living in a reality that operated by different rules than the one he'd left. Synchronicities that would have seemed miraculous in his old life were occurring daily. The right people were appearing at the right moments. The things he needed were arriving without the desperate effort that used to be required to get them. His body felt different, lighter, more responsive, more alive in a way that had nothing to do with his physical health and everything to do with the frequency he was inhabiting. He had crossed the gate. He was on the other side. And from the other side, he could see clearly what he hadn't been able to see from within the 3D world. The threshold had always been there. The gate had been there his entire life. He had walked past it 100 times without recognizing it. What had changed was not the gate. What had changed was that his frequency had finally matched what was on the other side. And when the frequency matched, the gate opened. And when the gate opened, the only question was whether he was going to step through. He stepped through. You are Elias, not literally, not in the biographical sense, but in the structural sense. The threshold you are standing at is the same threshold. The frequency shift you are undergoing is the same shift. The apparent chaos of a life reorganizing around a new order is the same chaos, and the gate is open. The only question is whether you're going to step through. Let's talk about what makes people not step through. Because the gate being open is not the same as the crossing being easy. There are specific forces that hold consciousness at the threshold, specific patterns that keep you at the gate without crossing, and naming them is part of the crossing itself, because you cannot move through what you cannot see. The first force is the identity investment. You have built a self. You have built it carefully, over years, out of experiences and stories and relationships and beliefs and patterns of behavior. That self knows how to navigate the 3D world. It has strategies for safety, for connection, for meaning. It has a story about who you are and what you're capable of and what you deserve. And crossing the gate means that self is going to change, not disappear, transform. But the transformation is real, and the self that you currently identify with knows at some level that it will not be the same on the other side. And it does not want to not be the same. It wants to survive the crossing unchanged. It wants to get to the crystalline timeline and still be the same person it was in 3D, with all the same strategies and stories and defenses intact. This is not possible. The phase transition changes the system. You cannot carry the 3D self through the gate and have it remain a 3D self. The crossing transforms it. The old identity doesn't die, but it becomes something different, something larger, something that contains what it was, but is no longer limited to it. And the resistance to that transformation is the first thing that keeps people at the gate. The second force is the social field, the people around you, the ones who love you, the ones you're responsible to, the ones whose approval you've organized your life around. Most of them are not at this gate. Most of them are still fully embedded in the 3D frequency. And when you begin to shift, when your frequency begins to change, the social field pushes back. Not maliciously, not because the people in it want to harm you, but because coherent systems resist the loss of a member. Because the people who care about you are frightened by the changes they see in you. Because the 3D world has no framework for what you're doing. And in the absence of a framework, what you're doing looks like instability, like irresponsibility, like a breakdown. Elias felt this. The weight of the people around him who were frightened for him, who were trying to pull him back to the familiar, who were offering him the comfort of the old world because they had no concept of the new one. And the love in that pulling back is real. The care is real, but the direction is wrong. You cannot cross the gate by going back. The third force is the evidence gap. The crystalline timeline operates by different rules than the 3D world. But when you're standing at the gate, you don't have evidence of those rules yet. You have glimpses. You have the felt sensor of the frequency. You have the knowing that something is real on the other side. But you don't have the track record, the accumulated experience, the years of living in the new reality that would give you certainty. And the 3D mind demands evidence before it will cross. It wants proof. It wants guarantees. It wants to know exactly what's on the other side before it commits to crossing. But the gate doesn't work that way. The evidence of the crystalline timeline is available on the other side of the gate, not before it. The proof is in the crossing. You cannot get the evidence without taking the step. And this is the exact structure of every genuine threshold. You cannot know what's on the other side until you cross, and you cannot cross until you're willing to not know. The uncertainty is not a flaw in the design. The uncertainty is the gate itself. Crossing into certainty while remaining in certainty is not a crossing. The crossing requires stepping into the unknown. The fourth force is the comfort of incompletion. This one is subtle. There is a certain safety in being at the gate that is not available on either side. When you're at the gate, you're still becoming. You haven't arrived yet, which means you haven't failed yet. You haven't committed to the new reality, which means you haven't risked losing it yet. You can still tell yourself that you're on your way, that you're almost there, that you're doing the work. And this story of being in process, of being almost there, can become its own kind of home, a way of inhabiting the threshold indefinitely without crossing. This is the most insidious trap at the gate, not the fear of crossing, the comfort of almost crossing. The identity of being someone who is waking up, who is doing the work, who is at the edge of something, without ever actually stepping through. The seeker who never arrives. The student who never graduates. The person who has been almost ready to change their life for years. You know if this is you. You feel it in the way I'm describing it. And if you feel it, that recognition is itself a gate. That recognition is the observation that collapses the superposition. That recognition is the moment where the almost crossing becomes the actual crossing, if you let it. The gate is open, not almost open. Open. Now let's do the crossing itself. Let's move through the threshold together. Not as a metaphor, not as a visualization exercise that you watch from the outside, but as an actual frequency attunement, a practice of consciously moving your awareness from the 3D frequency to the crystalline frequency, right now, in this moment. Find the place in your body where you feel the most tension. Don't analyze it. Don't try to understand what it's about. Just locate it. It might be in your chest, or your throat, or your stomach, or your shoulders, or your jaw. Just find the place where your body is holding something tight. Now recognize what that tightness is. That tightness is the 3D world. That tightness is the contraction, the smallness, the effort of holding yourself together against a reality that you've been experiencing as separate from you and potentially threatening to you. That tightness is not bad. It is not a failure. It is the body's honest response to the frequency it has been living in. It is the physical signature of the 3D world. Now, without trying to release the tension, without forcing anything. Just expand your awareness past the edges of your body. Let your awareness extend outward, past the boundary of your skin, past the boundary of the room you're in, past the boundary of the building, outward into the space around you. Not imagining this, not visualizing it, actually doing it. Actually letting your awareness go where it can go when you stop confining it to the body. Notice what happens to the tension when you do this. Notice that the tightness doesn't disappear, but it becomes smaller relative to the space you're now aware of. It becomes a small contraction within a vast expansion. It is still there, but it is no longer the whole of your experience. It is one thing within a much larger field. This is the crystalline frequency. This is what it feels like. This spaciousness, this expansion, this sense of being larger than the thing that was contracting you. This is the baseline of the crystalline timeline. This is what it feels like to be on the other side of the gate. Stay here for a moment. Don't rush back. Don't immediately start analyzing what you're experiencing or trying to figure out what it means. Just be in it. Just let yourself feel the difference between the contracted 3D frequency and this expanded crystalline frequency. Let your nervous system register the difference. Let your body feel what it feels like to inhabit a larger reality. Now notice this. From this expanded awareness, the things that felt urgent in the contracted state feel different. The problems that felt pressing feel smaller. Not because they've disappeared, but because you are now larger than they are. In the 3D frequency, you are the same size as your problems, or smaller. In the crystalline frequency, you are always larger. The problems are real. The challenges are real. But they are contained within your awareness, rather than your awareness being contained within them. This is the structural shift. This is what changes when you cross the gate. Not the external circumstances, not immediately, not automatically, but the relationship between your awareness and your circumstances. In 3D, your circumstances define the boundaries of your reality. In the crystalline timeline, your awareness defines the boundaries of your reality, and your circumstances exist within that awareness rather than determining it. This is not a small thing. This is everything. This is the entire difference between living in a world that happens to you and living in a world that you participate in creating. This is the difference between being subject to reality and being a co-creator of it. This is what's on the other side of the gate. Let's talk about what actually changes when you cross. Because there are people who will tell you that crossing to the crystalline timeline means your life becomes perfect, that problems disappear, that difficulty ends, that you float in a state of bliss untouched by the challenges of physical existence. This is not what happens. This is a misunderstanding of what the crystalline timeline is. The crystalline timeline is not a place where there are no challenges. It is a frequency range where challenges are experienced differently, where the same external circumstances that would have contracted you in 3D become the material for expansion in the crystalline frequency, where what looked like an obstacle becomes a threshold, where what looked like a loss becomes a release, where what looked like a failure becomes a redirection. The challenges don't disappear, but your relationship to them changes completely. Because in the crystalline timeline, you are no longer a separate self being acted upon by an indifferent universe. You are a coherent consciousness in a responsive field, and every challenge that arrives is arriving because it is in resonance with something in your frequency that is ready to be transformed. Every difficulty is a gate. Every loss is a release. Every ending is a crossing point. This is not toxic positivity. This is not the 3D spiritual bypass of pretending that hard things aren't hard. This is the structural recognition that in a coherent, resonant field, nothing arrives by accident. Everything is in relationship with your frequency. And when you understand that, when you feel that in your body as a lived reality rather than a philosophical position, the experience of challenge transforms. Not because the challenge is less real, but because you are no longer fighting against it. You are moving with it. You are letting it do what it came to do, which is transform you. There is also this. In the crystalline timeline, your relationship with time changes. This is one of the most disorienting and most liberating aspects of the crossing. Time in 3D is a pressure. It is always running out. There is never enough of it. The future is a threat. It contains things you haven't prepared for, things that could go wrong, things that could take away what you currently have. The past is a weight. It contains the evidence for all the stories you tell about yourself, all the failures and wounds and patterns that define the limits of what's possible for you. In the crystalline timeline, time becomes a resource rather than a pressure. The present moment expands. You find that there is more time in each moment than you previously thought. Not because the clock slows down, but because your relationship to the clock changes. You stop spending the present moment in the future or the past, and when you are fully in the present moment is vast. It contains everything you need. It is not a brief flickering instant between what was and what will be. It is the only place where anything actually exists, and when you inhabit it fully, you discover that it is infinite. The future in the crystalline timeline is not a threat. It is a field of possibility that your current frequency is organizing. You are not waiting to see what happens. You are, through the quality of your awareness and the frequency of your being, participating in the shaping of what happens. This is not the same as controlling outcomes. Control is a 3D concept, the effort of a separate self to force an indifferent universe to comply. What happens in the crystalline timeline is not control, but co-creation. You are in relationship with the field. The field responds to you. You respond to the field. And in that relationship, things organize themselves in ways that the 3D mind would call miraculous, but that the crystalline awareness recognizes as the normal operation of a coherent, resonant system. The past in the crystalline timeline is not a weight. It is a foundation. The things that happened to you, the difficult ones, the ones that broke you open, the ones you've been carrying, they are not evidence of your limitations. They are the precise experiences that brought your frequency to the threshold of this gate. They are the training ground that prepared you for the crossing. And when you can see them from the crystalline frequency, you don't see them as wounds to be healed or traumas to be processed. You see them as the exact curriculum that was required to bring you here. Not because suffering is good, but because nothing in a coherent field is wasted. Everything that happened to you was in resonance with your frequency at the time, and it brought you step by step to this exact threshold. From the crystalline timeline, your past is not something to be escaped. It is something to be honored. It is the path that brought you to the gate. Let's talk about the body. Because the crystalline shift is not only a shift in consciousness, it is a shift in the physical body as well. And this is important to understand, because the body is not separate from consciousness. It is consciousness in a particular density. It is the physical expression of your frequency. And as your frequency shifts, your body shifts with it. Many of you who are at this threshold are experiencing physical symptoms that don't have a clear medical explanation. Unusual fatigue or unusual energy. Sometimes both in rapid alternation. Sensitivity to things that didn't used to bother you. Certain foods, certain environments, certain people. A feeling of electricity or vibration in your body, particularly at night. Changes in sleep, either sleeping much more than usual or needing much less. Heightened senses, things seeming brighter, sounds seeming louder, emotional responses seeming more intense. A feeling that your skin is somehow more permeable than it used to be, that you're more affected by the energetic quality of your environment. These are not symptoms of illness. They are symptoms of frequency upgrade. They are the body's experience of the phase transition. The physical body is reorganizing at the cellular level to support the new frequency range. The nervous system is rewiring. The endocrine system is recalibrating. The sensory systems are expanding their range. This is why you feel different. This is why your body is behaving in ways it hasn't before. Care for your body during this transition with the understanding that it is doing extraordinary work. It needs rest, It needs clean fuel, water, food that is close to its natural form, air that is as clean as you can access. It needs movement that is gentle and rhythmic, walking, swimming, yoga, anything that helps the nervous system process the frequency changes without overwhelming it. It needs time in nature, because the natural world vibrates at a frequency that is closer to the crystalline than the built environment is. And time in nature gives your body reference points for the frequency you're moving toward. And it needs you to stop fighting what it's doing. The fatigue is the body asking for rest during a period of intensive reorganization. The sensitivity is the body's new perceptual range coming online. The strange feelings are the body learning a new frequency. Don't pathologize them. Don't try to suppress them. Receive them as information. Work with them as the body's participation in the crossing. There is something else happening in the body during this shift that is worth naming directly. The heart. The physical heart and the energetic heart. The center of your chest. The place where you feel love and grief and longing and connection. This is the primary organ of the crystalline frequency, not the brain. The brain is the primary organ of 3D consciousness, the analytical, strategic, boundary-maintaining mind that navigates the world of separate objects. The heart is the primary organ of crystalline consciousness, the connective, resonant, field-sensitive awareness that navigates the world of coherent relationships. As you cross the gate, you will notice a shift in where your intelligence seems to be coming from. The brain will still work. You will still think, still analyze, still reason. But the quality of knowing that guides your most important decisions will increasingly come from the heart rather than the head. Not emotion in the reactive sense, not the triggered feelings that are responses to 3D stimuli, but the deep knowing that has a quality of certainty without evidence, of recognition without prior experience, of love that is not personal but structural. This is what people mean when they talk about heart intelligence. It is not soft or vague or less reliable than analytical thinking. It is a different mode of intelligence, one that operates by resonance rather than logic, that accesses information through coherence rather than calculation. And in the crystalline timeline, it is the primary navigation system. You may have been told, directly or indirectly, that trusting your heart over your head is naive, that feelings are unreliable, that the rational mind is the only trustworthy guide. This is a 3D belief. It is appropriate for the 3D world, where consciousness is navigating a reality of separate objects by mechanical causation, where logic and evidence are the appropriate tools. But in the crystalline timeline, you are navigating a reality of coherent relationships by resonance. And for that navigation, the heart is more accurate than the head. Learning to trust the heart, to distinguish between the reactive emotions of the 3D self and the deep knowing of the crystalline heart is one of the primary practices of the crossing. And it begins with simply noticing. Noticing when a decision feels right in your chest, even when your head can't justify it. Noticing when something feels wrong in your body, even when the logic says it should be fine. Noticing the quality of knowing that arrives without process, without deliberation, without the machinery of analytical thought. That quality of knowing is your crystalline intelligence. It has always been there. It has been there your whole life, speaking to you in the moments when you were quiet enough to hear it. You have followed it sometimes, and those times were the ones that led you somewhere true. You have ignored it other times, and those times were the ones that led you into the experiences that eventually brought you to this threshold. The crossing is, in part, the decision to make that intelligence primary, to let the heart lead and the head support, rather than the other way around. Now, I want to speak to something that many of you are carrying that needs to be named directly: the loneliness of the threshold. Standing at this gate is not a social experience. You cannot bring everyone you love with you through it. You cannot wait for the people around you to be ready before you cross. The gate opens for individuals at individual moments, and the crossing is always, in some fundamental sense, solitary. You go through alone. And in a world where most of the people you know are still fully embedded in the 3D frequency, the process of shifting toward the crystalline timeline can feel profoundly isolating. You may have tried to explain what you're experiencing to people who are close to you, and found that the words don't land, that what feels to you like the most real and important thing happening in your life sounds to them like confusion or instability or spiritual bypassing or magical thinking. And their inability to understand is not a failure on their part. They are not wrong from within their framework. From within the 3D framework, what you're describing doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit the map. And people who are fully invested in a map will always resist information that the map can't hold. This is painful. The loneliness of being at a threshold that the people you love can't see is real. And it is part of the crossing. Not as a punishment or a test, but as the natural consequence of being at the leading edge of a frequency shift. The pioneer is always ahead of the group. The one who crosses first is always crossing alone. But here is what I want you to know. The loneliness is temporary in the specific sense. As you cross the gate, as you establish yourself in the crystalline frequency, you will find others who are there. You will find people whose frequency matches yours. Not necessarily people who use the same language. Not necessarily people who have the same framework, but people whose quality of being resonates with yours. People in whose presence your body feels light rather than heavy. People with whom conversation feels like recognition rather than performance. People who are living from the crystalline frequency, even if they've never heard the term. These people are already in your field. Some of them you've already met and recognized without fully knowing what you were recognizing. Some of them you haven't met yet, but you will, because as your frequency stabilizes in the crystalline range, the resonance field that surrounds you will naturally draw them in. The crystalline timeline is not a lonely place. It is a place of deep, coherent connection. But the connection is of a different quality than the 3D connections you've known. It is not based on shared history or proximity or social category. It is based on frequency, on resonance, on the recognition of one crystalline consciousness by another. The loneliness at the gate is the last experience of the 3D world separation. It is the final contraction before the expansion. It is the moment of maximum aloneness that precedes the discovery of a connection so deep and so real that it makes the 3D connections you've been trying to maintain feel thin by comparison. Cross the gate. The connection is on the other side. I want to speak now about something that the word chosen carries that needs to be examined. Because the idea of being a chosen one comes loaded with a particular kind of danger that can actually become a gate in itself. A gate that looks like crossing, but is actually another form of staying. The danger is this: the chosen one identity, if it becomes an identity in the 3D sense, if it becomes a story you tell about yourself that makes you feel special, separate, superior to those who haven't crossed, it becomes a 3D structure. It becomes another shell. And it will hold you at the threshold just as surely as the fear of crossing will. The genuine chosen one experience is not one of superiority. It is one of responsibility. It is not the feeling of having been selected above others. It is the feeling of having been called to something that requires everything you have. It is not a comfortable identity. It is a demanding one. The ones who cross first cross, not because they are better than those who come after, but because they said yes to the crossing when it was hardest, before the path was worn, before the way was known, before there was a community of others who had already made it through. The chosen one is not special. The chosen one is simply the one who chose, at the level of their deepest nature, to be at this edge. And the choosing was not a reward. It was an agreement to be willing to be disoriented, to be misunderstood, to stand at the threshold in the loneliness and the critical fluctuations and the apparent chaos of a life reorganizing, and to cross anyway. To step through the gate before you can see clearly what's on the other side. To trust the frequency of what's pulling you forward more than the familiarity of what you're leaving behind. If you feel called to this, you are not special in the hierarchical sense. You are willing. You are the one who said yes. And that yes That willingness is the gate itself. The gate is open because you said yes. Before you knew what you were saying yes to, before you had the framework, before you understood what was being asked. Something in you said yes, and that yes opened the gate. And here you are, standing at the threshold, and the only question left is whether you're going to honor the yes that brought you here. Honor it. Let's talk about what the world looks like from the other side. Not as a destination to be reached and then possessed, but as a quality of reality that you begin to inhabit as you cross. Because the crystalline timeline is not a place you arrive at and then stay in permanently without any further work. It is a frequency you inhabit more and more fully as you practice inhabiting it. It is a way of being that becomes more natural the more you choose it. It is a home that you build by living in it. From the crystalline timeline, the world is recognizably the same world, the same physical reality, the same other people, the same general structure of daily life. But the quality of your experience of it is fundamentally different. Things that used to require enormous effort begin to require very little. Not because you've become lazy or passive, but because you are no longer fighting against the current. You are moving with the coherent field. And when you move with the field supports you. Things arrive, doors open, the right people appear at the right times. Not always in the form you expected or wanted, but in the form that is actually aligned with where you're going. This is what people call flow. Not the temporary flow state that 3D psychology describes, the peak performance state that athletes and artists enter and then leave, but a baseline flow, a chronic alignment with the field that makes the extraordinary feel ordinary, where synchronicity is not surprising, because it is the expected mode of operation of a coherent system. From the crystalline timeline, your relationship with other people changes. You stop needing people to be different than they are, not because you've become indifferent to them, but because you are no longer trying to get something from them that they can't give. In 3D, relationships are often organized around need. The need for validation, for safety, for the reflection of your identity back to you by someone who sees you the way you want to be seen. In the crystalline timeline, you are not operating from need in that way. You are operating from fullness, from a sense of being already complete. And from that fullness, relationships become something different, not transactions, not dependencies, but genuine meetings between two complete beings who choose to be in relationship because the relationship creates something that neither could create alone. This doesn't mean relationships become perfect or easy. It means they become honest. In the crystalline timeline, the pretense falls away. The performance falls away. You stop playing the roles that the 3D social field assigned to you and start showing up as what you actually are. And this is terrifying to some people and deeply relieving to others. The ones who are terrified by your authenticity are showing you where they are still invested in the 3D performance. The ones who are relieved are showing you who your crystalline tribe is. From the crystalline timeline, your relationship with your own mind changes. The mind that in 3D was a constant source of noise. The anxious planning, the rumination, the self-criticism, the endless narrative about what's happening and what it means and what you should do. That mind becomes quieter. Not silent, not empty, but quieter, less dominant, less in charge. The thoughts are still there, but they are no longer the whole of your experience. They are thoughts arising within a field of awareness that is larger than the thoughts. And from that larger awareness, you can see the thoughts for what they are. Not truth, not reality, but patterns. Habitual patterns, some useful and some not, arising and passing in the field of your awareness without necessarily having to be believed or acted on. This is equanimity, not the forced calm of someone trying very hard to not be upset, but the natural stability of a consciousness that is larger than the things that arise within it. The crystalline timeline is the home of equanimity. Not because nothing difficult happens there, but because you have crossed the threshold from being inside your experience to being the awareness within which your experience arises. And that shift, from being the content to being the container, is the deepest crossing of all. There is a practice I want to give you that supports the stabilization of the crystalline frequency. Not a complicated practice, not one that requires special conditions or extended time. A practice you can do in any moment of any day that brings you back to the crystalline frequency when you find yourself contracting back into 3D. The practice is this: stop in whatever moment you're in. Stop and ask yourself one question. Not a question about what to do or what to think. One question about what you are. The question is, what is aware of this? Whatever is happening, the difficulty, the confusion, the emotion, the thought, the sensation. Ask, what is aware of this? And then shift your attention from the content of your experience to the awareness itself, to the space in which the experience is arising, to the consciousness that is witnessing the thought, feeling the emotion, perceiving the sensation. That awareness is not in trouble. That awareness is not confused. That awareness is not contracted. That awareness is the crystalline frequency. It is always there. It is always available. It is the aspect of you that has already crossed the gate, the part of you that exists in the crystalline timeline right now, in this moment, regardless of what the 3D self is experiencing. What is aware of this? Practice this. not as a technique for making difficult things go away, as a practice of recognizing what you actually are. The 3D self is the content, the thoughts, the feelings, the body, the circumstances. The crystalline self is the awareness, the space in which the content arises. And you are not the content. You are the awareness. You have always been the awareness. The crossing is the recognition of what you have always been. This recognition is the gate. This is the crossing point, not a physical location, not a future moment. Right here, right now, in the recognition of the awareness that is reading these words, that is listening to this transmission, that is present before and during and after every experience you have ever had. What is aware of this? That is you. That is the crystalline self. That is what's on the other side of the gate, and you're already there. The gate opens in both directions. That is the thing that most people don't understand about threshold crossings. You don't cross the gate once and arrive permanently. You cross the gate and you establish a new baseline. And then, in the ordinary moments of daily life, you drift back toward the old frequency. Not because you've failed, but because the old neural pathways are still there. The old patterns are still encoded. The old world is still present. And each time you drift back, you practice returning. You practice asking what is aware of this. You practice expanding your awareness past the boundary of your body. You practice choosing the crystalline frequency over the 3D frequency, again and again, until the choosing becomes automatic, until the crystalline baseline is more stable than the 3D baseline, until you notice the drift back to 3D almost immediately and return to the expanded state without drama. This is not failure. This is how frequency stabilization works. The new frequency has to be practiced into permanence. The new neural pathways have to be reinforced through use. The new baseline has to be established through repeated return. Every time you drift and return, you are strengthening the crystalline architecture in your consciousness. Every time you notice the contraction and choose expansion, you are reinforcing the gate. You are making the crossing easier. You are building the home on the other side. Be patient with this process. Be patient with yourself in this process. The crossing is not a single event. It is an ongoing practice of choosing the frequency you are aligned with. And every choice, no matter how small, matters. Every moment of expansion, every instance of choosing the heart over the fear, every time you ask what is aware of this and shift your attention to the awareness, these are all crossings. These are all gates. These are all moments where the crystalline timeline becomes more real in your experience. The big crossing, the fundamental shift in baseline frequency, happens through the accumulation of small crossings, through the daily, moment-to-moment practice of choosing who you are becoming over who you have been. Through the willingness to be uncomfortable in the transition, to be misunderstood by the 3D world, to stand at the gate in the loneliness and the critical fluctuations, and choose to cross anyway. You are doing this. You have been doing this. The fact that you are here, at this transmission, at this gate, is evidence that you have been doing this. The crossing is already underway. It began before you knew it had begun. It will complete itself, because that is what crossings do. They complete themselves when the frequency is matched, when the gate is open, when the consciousness is willing. The frequency is matched. The gate is open. The consciousness is willing. Cross. Let me tell you what you carry with you when you cross. Because there is a fear that crossing means leaving behind everything that mattered. The people you love, the experiences that shaped you, the things that made your life in 3D meaningful. This fear is understandable, and it is not accurate. You carry everything with you. Not in the 3D sense, not the identities and patterns and strategies that belonged to the 3D frequency, but the love. The love is not 3D. The love was always crystalline. The love you have felt for the people in your life. The love that has moved through you in the moments that felt most real. That love is not a 3D phenomenon. It is the crystalline frequency expressing itself through the 3D form. And when you cross, the love doesn't diminish. It expands. It becomes less personal and more vast, less conditional and more unconditional, less dependent on the other person being a certain way, and more simply present as the quality of your being. You carry the beauty, the moments of genuine beauty that you have experienced in nature, in art, in music, in the face of someone you love, in the sudden recognition of something true. Those moments were always crystalline. They were the crystalline timeline touching your 3D experience. You carry them with you because they were never 3D to begin with. They were always the other side of the gate, visiting you in the form of a moment. You carry the wisdom. Everything you have learned through the living of your life, through the difficulties and the joys and the losses and the loves, that wisdom is yours. It crosses with you. It becomes the foundation on which the crystalline life is built. Nothing was wasted. Not a single experience, not a single lesson, not a single moment of genuine understanding. It is all part of the frequency you've built that brought you to this gate. What you leave behind is the suffering that was not necessary. The suffering that came from the 3D belief in separation, in scarcity, in the indifference of the universe. The suffering that came from fighting against what is, from trying to force reality to be different than it is, from protecting a self that doesn't need protecting in the way you thought it did. That suffering, not the difficulty, not the challenge, but the particular quality of suffering that comes from the 3D framework that you leave behind. And the leaving behind is not a loss. It is a relief so profound that it will feel, on the other side, like waking up. You are waking up. There is a community of people who are crossing this threshold right now. Not a formal community, not an organization, not a movement with a name and a structure, but a frequency community. A field of people whose consciousness is at this same threshold, who are undergoing the same phase transition, who are standing at different points along the same passage. Some of them are ahead of you in the crossing. Some of them are where you are. Some of them are just arriving at the gate, and they are in your life already, or they are about to be, because the crystalline field draws them to you as your frequency stabilizes. Recognize them. They are the ones whose presence makes your body feel light. They are the ones with whom conversation feels like remembering rather than learning. They are the ones who see what you're doing and don't need you to explain it. They are the ones who are also in the critical fluctuations, also in the disorientation, also in the strange grief and the strange excitement of a life reorganizing around a new frequency. They are your crossing companions. You don't need to find them. They will find you. Or rather, your shared frequency will organize your meeting. The crystalline timeline is efficient in this way. It doesn't require effort to bring the right people together. It requires frequency, and as your frequency stabilizes, the people who are in resonance with it will appear in your life with a naturalness that will feel, from the crystalline awareness, completely unremarkable, because it is the expected operation of a coherent field. The community is forming. The critical mass is building. The phase transition is not only personal, it is collective. And you are part of the collective crossing. You are one of the ones who is crossing now, who is at the leading edge, who is helping to build the frequency bridge that makes the crossing easier for those who come after. This is the work, not the work of striving or achieving, the work of crossing, the work of choosing the crystalline frequency again and again until it is stable, the work of being willing to be at the threshold, in the disorientation, in the loneliness, in the critical fluctuations, without collapsing back into the familiar. The work of trusting the gate. The gate is open. It has been open longer than you know. It opened when your frequency first matched what was on the other side. And it has been waiting, not impatiently, not with any urgency, because the crystalline timeline is not subject to 3D time pressure. It has been waiting with perfect stillness for you to arrive at the moment of crossing. You are at the moment of crossing. There is nothing more to prepare. There is nothing more to understand. There is nothing more to heal or process or achieve before you are ready. The readiness is not a future state. It is this moment. It is the awareness that is reading these words. It is the consciousness that has followed this transmission to this point. It is the frequency that found this gate and recognized it as a gate. You are ready. You have always been ready. The readiness was never in question. The only question was whether you would recognize the gate when you arrived at it. You have recognized it. Now, cross. The crossing looks like this. It looks like the next choice you make from the crystalline frequency rather than the 3D frequency. It looks like the next moment you choose expansion over contraction. It looks like the next time you follow the knowing in your heart over the anxiety in your head. It looks like the next conversation you have from your authentic self, rather than from the role the 3D world assigned you. It looks like the next moment you ask, "What is where of this?" and shift your attention to the awareness. It is not a dramatic event. It is not a moment of blinding light. It is not a single transformative experience that changes everything at once. It is the accumulation of small crossings into a new baseline. It is the practice of the new frequency until the new frequency is home. But it begins with the recognition, and the recognition is here. The recognition is now. The recognition is the awareness that has been present throughout this entire transmission. The awareness that recognized the gate when it appeared. The awareness that has been saying yes to each threshold within this larger threshold. That awareness is the crystalline self. It is not something you need to become. It is what you are. It is what you have always been, beneath the 3D layers, beneath the identity and the patterns and the strategies and the stories. The crystalline self was there before any of that. It will be there after all of that has transformed. It is the part of you that never needed the gate because it was never on the wrong side of it. You have been standing at the gate looking through at something that was already inside you. The crystalline timeline is not out there, on the other side of some external threshold. It is the depth of what you are. The crossing is not a movement in space. It is a shift in identification, from identifying as the 3D self that is subject to the 3D world, to identifying as the crystalline awareness within which the 3D world arises. This is the deepest crossing. This is the threshold beneath all the other thresholds. This is the gate that, once crossed, makes all other gates visible as the same gate. The recognition that you are not the content of your experience. You are the awareness within which the content arises. You are not the thought. You are the one who is aware of the thought. You are not the feeling. You are the one who feels it. You are not the circumstance. You are the consciousness within which the circumstance appears. That consciousness is crystalline. That consciousness is what you are. That consciousness is already on the other side of every gate. You are already there. You have always been there. The crossing is the recognition of where you have always been. And now, standing here at this threshold, at this gate that opened the moment your frequency matched what was on the other side, I want to say something directly to the part of you that has been carrying this alone. The part of you that has been feeling the shift without having language for it. The part of you that has been in the critical fluctuations, in the disorientation, in the strange in-between of a life reorganizing around a new frequency. The part of you that has been trying to explain this to people who couldn't hear it, who has been feeling the loneliness of the threshold, who has been wondering if what you're experiencing is real, or if you're somehow making it up. It is real. What you are experiencing is real. The shift is real. The gate is real. The crystalline timeline is real. And the fact that most of the 3D world cannot see it does not make it less real. It makes you a pioneer. It makes you one of the ones who is crossing before the crossing is common, before the path is worn, before the way is known. You are not confused. You are not falling apart. You are not spiritually bypassing or deluding yourself or avoiding the real world. You are in the process of a genuine phase transition. You are in the critical fluctuation period that precedes a fundamental change in the order of your consciousness. And everything you have been experiencing, the disorientation, the grief, the strange excitement, the sense of being between two worlds, the things falling away, the things arriving, all of it is exactly right. All of it is exactly what this process looks like from the inside. Trust the process. Trust the gate. Trust the frequency that brought you here. Trust the awareness that recognized this transmission as a transmission. Trust the knowing in your body that says yes to this, even when your analytical mind wants to qualify it. The gate is open. You are at the threshold, and you are ready. One version of you arrived at this transmission. A different version of you is leaving it. That is not a metaphor. That is the structure of what has happened here. The observation has been made. The measurement has occurred. The superposition has collapsed. The phase transition is underway, and it cannot be undone. You cannot unknow what you now know. You cannot unfeel the crystalline frequency that has been present throughout this transmission. You cannot unrecognize the gate. There is no going back from here. There is only forward, through the gate, into the crystalline timeline, into the frequency range where you were always meant to live, into the depth of what you actually are. The gate is open. Cross. You are the chosen one not because you were selected, but because you chose. Because something in you said yes to this threshold before you were born into this body. Because you agreed, at the deepest level of your nature, to be one of the ones who crosses now, who crosses first, who crosses before the way is easy and the path is clear, who crosses in the full disorientation of the in-between, because the knowing of what's on the other side is stronger than the fear of leaving what's behind. You chose this, and the choosing is honored. The choosing is seen. The choosing is the gate itself. The crystalline timeline is shifting you out of 3D, not as something being done to you, as something you are doing, as the fulfillment of the choice you made before you knew you were making it, as the completion of the frequency arc that your entire life in 3D was building toward. This is the moment. This is the crossing. This is the gate, and it is open. Step through. The other side is waiting. The crystalline world is waiting. The version of you that lives in coherence and resonance and expansion and flow, that version is waiting. Not in the future, not in some distant spiritual destination. Right here, right now, in the awareness that is present in this moment, in the consciousness that has been with you throughout this entire transmission, in the depth of what you already are. Step through. The gate is open. You are already crossing. If you are standing at a personal threshold right now, if you are in the in-between, in the disorientation, in the strange grief of something ending and something not yet arrived, return to this transmission in a moment of stillness. Let it meet you there again. And if someone in your life is at their own crossing point, share this with them, not as information, as a bridge. When you send this to someone who is standing at their gate, you are not just passing along a video. You are extending the frequency of the crossing into their field. You are making their threshold visible. You are strengthening both fields through the act of shared recognition. The crossing becomes easier when someone who has already felt the gate says to you, "I see it too. It is real. Step through. Welcome to the other side."